Welcome to a new video. Today, we dive deep into one of the darkest and most shocking stories. A story that tells the life of someone who lived among us, but behind his calm appearance hid unbelievable actions. Get ready to explore the horrifying details that made Jeffrey Dahmer a name etched in the history of heinous crimes. Let's begin. Welcome to a world that's unbelievable, but real.
It's time for the news. Delete, 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 delete.
Today's video is about one of the most infamous cannibals and serial killers in history. All kinds of psychological and mental disorders came together in this man. If you're someone interested in stories of serial killers, you've likely heard of him. He is Jeffrey Dahmer. Born on May 21, 1960 in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, USA, his father, Lionel Dahmer, was a chemist specializing in analytical chemistry, while his mother, Joyce Flint, worked in mental health counseling and care. Dahmer grew up in a family that loved him dearly. Both his mother and father cared for him deeply. I mention this so you don't think he was raised in a troubled family with constant conflict, assuming that's the reason he became a serial killer or criminal. On the contrary, he was raised in a family that loved him very much. His parents mentioned that as a child, Dahmer was sweet and very kind, and everyone loved him. However, as he grew older, his behavior began to change, and he became strange, exhibiting odd behaviors. He started to prefer isolation, to the extent that the school administration contacted his parents, informing them that he was a withdrawn and introverted child who did not enjoy playing with his peers. They asked if he was experiencing psychological issues, problems at home, conflicts, or if he was being subjected to any form of abuse. When Dahmer started school, he no longer spent much time with his parents. His mother was suffering from severe depression and was taking medication for it, which made her sleep most of the time. His father, on the other hand, was studying at university. I'm not sure what exactly, but based on the information I found, I believe he was pursuing a master's degree in chemistry. During this time, the relationship between his parents was strained and unstable. However, they tried in every possible way not to show their tension to Dahmer, especially since he was already dealing with sadness, isolation, and withdrawal. They chose not to divorce or expose him to their conflicts to avoid worsening his condition. Instead, they tried to present the image of a strong, united family. But their attempts failed. Dahmer later stated in several interviews that he grew up in an environment full of tension. When he was 6 years old, they moved to Ohio, but they did not live in a stable environment due to his father's work. His mother became pregnant for the second time and was afraid that Dahmer would not accept it because of his personality. So she tried to introduce the idea that he would no longer be alone and that a brother was coming slowly. She even let him choose a name, and he picked David. The relationship between the brothers was quite normal, but Dahmer became more sensitive, increasingly withdrawn, and isolated. He even stopped talking much with his parents. When he was between 6 and 7 years old, he developed a strong fascination with decomposing animal bones, or in other words, skeletal remains. It is very unusual for a child this age to be attracted to such things. His parents didn't pay much attention to it, and this was their biggest mistake, as this was the beginning of his journey as a serial killer. He would collect the bodies of dead animals and dissect them to examine their organs. In a television interview, one of his schoolmates mentioned that Dahmer was often bullied because he was attached to strange things and behaved differently. Later in high school, this same friend met Dahmer again and noticed a drastic change. He had transformed from a frightened, bullied child into a terrifying figure whom everyone feared and respected. In high school, Dahmer was not a diligent student. His grades were average. He exhibited strange behaviors, often pretending to have seizures, to the point where his name became synonymous with trouble. If someone wanted to cause a scene or get into trouble, others would say, "Do a Dahmer." In 1978, when Dahmer was 18 years old, he became addicted to alcohol and drank every day. His parents finally decided to end their relationship. After the divorce, his mother moved to a separate house, and so did his father, leaving Dahmer completely alone. At this age, as is common, Dahmer was trying to understand himself and his personality, why he was drawn to these behaviors, and why he felt compelled to act on them. Dahmer graduated from high school, and 2 weeks later, he was on the road when he saw someone hitchhiking. That person was Stephen Mark, an 18-year-old. Dahmer stopped and asked him about his destination. He then suggested that Stephen come to his house to hang out before heading to the party, as his home was near the location Stephen wanted to go to. Stephen agreed, and that was the biggest mistake he ever made. He and Dahmer spent an enjoyable time together, but when Stephen wanted to leave, Dahmer's attitude changed, his other personality emerged, and he became extremely angry. He grabbed a 4.5-kilogram dumbbell and struck Stephen on the head. Stephen fell unconscious, but Dahmer didn't stop there. He strangled him while he was still unconscious. Then he took Stephen's body to the basement, stripped the flesh from the bones, and buried everything in the backyard. A few days later, he reopened the grave, crushed the bones, and scattered them. As for the flesh, he placed it in a large bucket filled with acid until it completely dissolved, erasing all traces of Stephen. His father wanted him to continue university and pressured him until he agreed. However, he only completed 1 semester before dropping out. His father then gave him an ultimatum: either join the military or get a job. Dahmer chose the military, but due to his alcoholism and behavior, he was discharged. Too ashamed to return to his father, he moved to Miami, where he worked at a sandwich shop and slept on the beach. However, he couldn't handle this lifestyle, so he moved in with his father and stepmother. He caused many problems, leading his father to send him to live with his grandmother. At first, Dahmer treated his grandmother well. He searched for a job and eventually found work in a blood analysis lab and later at a chocolate factory. However, he was repeatedly fired for different reasons. Despite his attempts to integrate, Dahmer could not control his dark desires. One day, he read in the newspaper about the death of a child who lived near his grandmother's house and that the burial would take place that same day. A horrifying idea occurred to him: to go to the cemetery and exhume the body after the burial. He indeed attempted to open the coffin but failed. In 1986, he was arrested. After his release from prison, he entered a new phase of criminality. In 1987, he met Stephen Tuomi, a 25-year-old young man. They spent a night together in a hotel, but in the morning, Dahmer woke up to find Stephen dead beside him, with no memory of how he had killed him. Panicked, he decided to carry the body to his grandmother's house and dispose of it there. His crimes escalated rapidly thereafter. In 1988, he lured a 14-year-old boy named James Doxtator, promising him money in exchange for photos, then drugged him, killed him, and dissolved his body with acid. That same year, he repeated the act with another young man named Richard Guerrero, 22 years old. In 1989, he met Anthony Sears, 24 years old. After gaining his trust and luring him, he killed him and kept his skull as a trophy. Then, in 1990, he continued killing Edward Smith, Ernest Miller, and David Thomas, each of them killed in nearly the same way: drugging, strangulation, then dismemberment and preservation of the body parts he found distinctive. By 1991, Dahmer had become a monster restrained by nothing. He killed a series of young victims such as Curtis Straughter, Errol Lindsay, and Tony Hughes. With some of them, he attempted bizarre experiments, such as injecting acid into their brains in hopes of turning them into zombies. But all his attempts ended in failure and death. His most controversial case involved the child Konorak Synthesomphone, who escaped from his apartment half-naked and drugged and was encountered by the police. However, Dahmer managed to deceive the officers and convince them that the child was his friend. They returned him to Dahmer's apartment, where he was killed immediately. He continued in this manner until July 1991, when he lured another young man named Tracy Edwards. But this time, Tracy resisted courageously and managed to escape, then alerted the police. When security forces entered his apartment, they found an unimaginably horrifying scene. Preserved skulls, human hearts and organs in the refrigerator, and barrels filled with acid. At that moment, the mask fell, and the world was exposed to the Milwaukee monster, Jeffrey Dahmer. After the police discovered Jeffrey Dahmer's apartment in July 1991, the case was considered one of the most horrifying in U.S. history. Inside his apartment, authorities found 17 human skulls, some placed on tables as decorations, along with hearts, livers, and genital organs stored in the refrigerator and freezer, as well as barrels filled with caustic acid used to dissolve bodies. The crime scene photos were so disturbing that some investigators suffered long-term psychological trauma. Dahmer was arrested, and during interrogations, he coldly confessed to all his crimes, describing them in chilling detail: how he drugged his victims, killed them, and then dismembered their bodies. He explained that he did not kill out of hatred, but rather out of a desire to possess the victim forever. These confessions sparked heated debates about his mental state. Was he insane, or simply a cold-blooded monster? His trial began in January 1992 under massive media coverage. He faced 15 counts of first-degree murder. The defense argued that he was legally insane and that his actions were not carried out with full consciousness. The prosecution, however, insisted that he was fully aware of his crimes, carefully planned them, and was therefore completely responsible. The trial lasted around 6 weeks, during which shocking evidence was presented. Crime scene photos, the victims' skulls, and even the cooking utensils he used to cut human flesh. Several victims' families broke down in court as the gruesome details were revealed. In the end, after a brief deliberation, the jury found Dahmer guilty of 15 counts of murder, and the court sentenced him to 15 consecutive life terms, more than 900 years in prison, with no chance of parole. Dahmer was sent to the Columbia Correctional Institution in Wisconsin. At first, he was placed in solitary confinement for his own protection, but later he was allowed to mingle with the general prison population. He spent much of his time reading religious books and claimed to have become a devout Christian, even being baptized in prison. However, he would sometimes mock his crimes, even behind bars, which made other inmates despise him deeply. On the morning of November 28, 1994, while working in a prison facility with 2 other inmates, one of them, Christopher Scarver, attacked Dahmer with a metal bar. Dahmer suffered severe head and body injuries and was pronounced dead shortly after being taken to the hospital. Thus ended the life of one of history's most notorious serial killers, a man who had instilled terror in people's hearts for years. And so ends the story of Jeffrey Dahmer, one of the darkest chapters in the history of crime. A man who lived among people with a calm face, yet hid behind it a merciless monster. His story reminds us that evil can sometimes lurk behind the simplest appearances. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to support the channel by subscribing and liking, and we'll meet again soon with a new story.